quite revolutionary. His child may break tradition, and he does not want that to happen. So the king takes great steps, great lengths, to ensure that his son follows in his footsteps. So Siddhartha Gautama, the king, presents a situation where Siddhartha lives in an environment where he wants for nothing, where he has everything his heart could possibly desire. Siddhartha Gautama took this to such a degree that he ordered the gardeners, the servants in the castle compound to ensure that Siddhartha sees nothing of death, going so far as to clip blooms that had wilted to ensure there weren't any dead little animals that were in the garden. They cleaned up all signs of death. Because Siddhartha Gautama wanted to ensure that his son did not go the way of relieving suffering. So he wanted to make sure that his existence was free of suffering. So Siddhartha Gautama grew up in an environment that was quite controlled. He was a prince. He had the greatest teachers, the greatest mentors, and everything that he tried, he accomplished at. He excelled at. Okay? You read descriptions of Siddhartha Gautama, makes it very, very clear that he was an extremely handsome man, that he was very strong, very strapping, that he was very intelligent, that he, for lack of a better word, and he lived this life of wanting for nothing. But he lived a very controlled life. His father did not allow him outside of his gilded cage. You ever heard this term before, gilded cage? It's the idea of, yes, it's beautiful, it's bejeweled, it's gold, but it still has a lock on it. It's still a cage. He lived in this gilded cage. His constant friend, his constant companion was a man by the name of Channa. Channa was a servant. He was selected by the king to be Siddhartha Gautama's constant companion and constant friend. And also it was Channa's responsibility to keep tabs on Siddhartha. So he was his charioteer, he was the king's spy, but he was also Siddhartha Gautama's very good friend. And for the beginning of Siddhartha's life onward to adulthood, Siddhartha Gautama succeeded in absolutely everything that he tried. He was the greatest horseman. He was a great archer. His skill at archery, in fact, was such that there was a contest in the kingdom to find him a mate, or actually to find a mate for the most beautiful woman in the kingdom, Yashodhara. There was a contest for her hand, and sure enough, it was with bow. And you can get a sense of how this goes down. Another suitor pulls back the bow, lets fly the arrow, and smack right dab in the middle of the bullseye. It's Siddhartha Gautama's turn. He takes aim, he lets the arrow fly, and guess what happens? Yeah, he splits the other arrow. So he wins the hand of Yashodhara, the most beautiful woman in the land, most perfectly. They marry. They have a child. This child's name is Rahula, which actually, if you look up the term Rahula, it translates as something like anchor or fetter. And, an anchor that's holding you back, or anchor that's tying you to reality. Someone speculated that this was an example of him being tied to this life and this existence. Others have speculated that this idea of anchor or fetter was a sense of Siddhartha's, that Rahula was tying him down, was keeping him back. My responsibilities in this life keep me from having fun. Siddhartha Gautama is living a perfect life. He's going to inherit the kingdom. He has a beautiful wife, he has a beautiful son, he has a father that loves him in a grand and expansive kingdom. And at the age of 29, Siddhartha Gautama looks around at his existence, at all of the wealth, of all of the opulence, of all of the things that he has, and he asks the very fundamental question, is this it? Is this all life has to offer? I mean, think about this. We're talking about a prince. We're talking about someone that's about to inherit the kingdom. We're talking about someone that has everything that the world around us, at least in Western culture, tells us is of value. All these material things, all this material wealth. And he has the audacity to ask a very existential question. Is this it? Is this what life has to offer me? begins to get down in the dumps. He begins to have a wandering sensation about it. He's sitting up in his palace overlooking the kingdom, a palace that he's left very infrequently. And he goes to his father and he asks permission to leave the compound, to leave the palace. Now his father is fearful that if Siddhartha leaves the palace and encounters suffering, that he might want to fix it. So his father says, no, I do not want you to leave the palace. And there's a couple different versions of the story. One is that his father actually relents and he takes great care to ensure that when Siddhartha travels through the kingdom, he sees nothing of death, but he gets lost along the way. I don't like that version. I like the other version better, where Siddhartha Gautama decides that regardless of what his father has said, he's leaving the palace and sneaks out. I like this version better because it just seems, it's easier for me to relate to. That's why I like this version. As Siddhartha Gautama is getting ready to escape the palace, just to see what's happening out there, he's stopped by his constant companion, Channa. And Channa says, Master, where are you going? You know that you're not supposed to leave the palace. And Siddhartha said, I'm going outside the palace. I want to see the world around me. I want to experience life. And Channa said, I can't allow that to happen. Siddhartha responds, no, you're not supposed to let anything bad happen to me. So it would be in your best interest to go with me to make sure nothing bad happens to me. Kind of stuck in a bad spot. Channa relents. So Channa is going to accompany Siddhartha Gautama outside of the palace. When you think about this for the first time, experiencing life outside of the palace. I don't know how many of you are from small towns. I'm from a small town. When I first came to college here at Northwest, I was awed by the bright lights of the big city. I mean, you had stop signs. All the sounds were just came at me. You just overload coming from such a small town to a big town. I've had opportunities to travel abroad, being a country mouse. Landing and traveling in Prague for the first time was overwhelming. Just the sights, the sounds, the smells, the different ways that people talked and dressed. It was a lot. It was awesome. I loved it. So you can kind of imagine Siddhartha Gautama the first time walking outside of the palace, wandering the alleyways of the kingdom, seeing for the first time street performers, smelling what the average folks were eating as opposed to the incense and the beautiful preparations that he was used to. He was just in awe at everything. It was so new, it was so fresh, it was so exciting. And then he sees, crossing the street, an old man. A man that was wearing the garb of a warrior. A man that was using his implement of war, kind of like a staff, as one would use a cane. A man that was old, had once been strapping, but had been hobbled by age. And you got to remember, Siddhartha Gautama grew up in an environment where he saw nothing as suffering, where somehow the servants remained at the same age. And he looks at Channa, his companion, and says, "What is this? This is a figure that's wearing the garb of a warrior, but he does not look like the palace guards that guard me. They're all strong and strapping and 6'3". This guy's 5'3". He's shrunk. And you can imagine Channa looking at Siddhartha, kind of perplexed and trying to explain, well, Master, this is old age. You may be healthy. Your wife may be healthy. Your child may be healthy. The palace guards may be healthy. But out in the rest of the world, age happens. Master, you too are going to grow old. The king is growing old. And you can imagine for the first time Siddhartha thinking about his own mortality, thinking about suffering of others. And after all of his experiences that day, he goes back to the palace, a bit somber. Well, a couple of days pass.